What I'll be doing today is showing you the features of this machine, and I will also be doing some test cuts. And here's a close look at it. It weighs 16 kilograms or about 31 pounds. Fairly light. And I'll crack open the box to show you what comes with it. And by the way, this machine can run on 220 or 110 volts. So let's have a look at what comes with it. You get your torch. I've already taken the torch out of the plastic bag. You do get a small hose in case you need that to connect your compressor, but I don't think you will. You get some extra tips here and some tape for the fittings. Here's the adapter to go from 220 to 110 volts. And here's your ground clamp. And you also get a small tool like this. And you also get a manual with it, which I recommend that you go through. By the way, this is the 7th generation of the BTC 500DP plasma cutter. So to start with, I will just plug in the negative ground clamp right in this port here. This is the connector and the plugs at the end of the torch cable. And the main plug here will screw in right here. The small red wire here will go behind this knob here. And lastly, this little plug here will plug right into here. And I will only be tightening these up by hand. Now, if we look at the back here, you can see that they were smart and they did put a connector for your compressor. So if you have the connector on your compressor, you will not be needing this hose today to use it. And also the machine has one fan in the back, and this fan will only come on once the machine starts to heat up. So when you turn it on, it's going to be quiet. And the on-off switch is in the rear of this machine as well. So I don't have the air plugged in yet, that's why I'm getting this reading and no PSI. Now all you need to do is put a fitting like this at the end of your compressor hose and just plug it in. And this here also serves as an air dryer as well. If you see it's filling up with water, you just push up on the button here and it'll drain any water that's built up in there. Now this is a dedicated plasma cutting machine. You cannot weld with this machine at all. All it does is cut steel. Now here's the knob to set the PSI on the machine depending on how thick of steel you're cutting. To do that, you'll have to pop it up and then you can turn it up or down. If you want to get the proper reading, you will have to go here and get the air to flow out right here. Now you get an accurate adjustment, and when you're ready to cut, you just put it to cut. This is your amp setting. It only goes up to 50 amps. So right here you have your 2T and 4T settings. If you are in 2T setting, which is what you'll use the most, you have to keep your finger depressed on the trigger so that it produces a flame. Once you release the trigger, the flame will stop. In 4T, what happens is once you push the trigger in, even though you've released it, the flame will keep going until you push the trigger in again and release it. Right here you have the post-flow setting. What that means is the amount of air that keeps flowing through the torch after you stop cutting. And that post-flow air is to cool your consumables so that they last longer. So in the case here, there's a 3-second setting. So once I release the torch, there will be air flowing through the torch, through the nozzle to cool it down for 3 seconds. Here, I'll show you. Now, if I go and set it for, let's say, 6 seconds, it will blow air through there for 6 seconds after. So the longer the post flow of air is, the longer your consumables will last, but it can become annoying if the post flow is too long because it may delay your work. Now today I will leave the post flow at 3 because I will be working outside and it is cold. Now, if you go over here, pilot arc settings, you can set the seconds for how long you want the torch to stay on when it's not in contact with metal. So if you're cutting steel with a lot of gaps in it, you might want to set it at 5 seconds, for example. So if you're cutting stuff like this here, when the torch hits a gap, it will not turn off for the setting you've set it at. So if I put it at 5 seconds, the torch will run for 5 seconds in a gap before you hit the next metal cut. So very handy if you're cutting stuff like this or metal with gaps. And for today, I will be leaving the pilot arc setting at 5 seconds. I think that will do for what I want to demonstrate today. And have a close look at the torch here. So this torch here, you do not have to be in contact with the metal for it to strike an arc. So all you have to do is drag your torch on the metal you're cutting, and there will be a small gap between the torch and the metal you're cutting. I find these are much easier to use than the ones that you actually have to have contact with the steel to do a cut. Now, one really important thing I want to show you about halfway in your owner's manual is on this page over here. It gives you a cutting thickness chart. If you're running 220 and you are cutting material that is, let's say, 5 millimeters, you will need a pressure between 40 to 50 psi, 6 millimeters the same. And once you're up to 12 millimeters, you might want to go from 60 to 70 psi. I will imagine that probably 12 millimeters to half an inch will be the maximum cut that this machine can do cleanly. But definitely keep this little chart, maybe take a picture with your phone and keep it handy with you. And I'll be running the machine at 220 volts, and it's indicating that it is on 220 right here. You don't have to push any buttons or make any settings. It will detect it on its own whether you're using 220 or 110 volts. Alright guys, I just brought the machine back in from outside. I did use it for approximately 1 hour. I was using it in between the video clips that you did not see. And apparently, according to the manual here, the duty cycle on this machine is 60%. Just thought I'd let you guys know that. If you do buy the machine, make sure to read the manual. Also, I have to say I'm impressed with this little machine. It cut right up to 3/4, as you saw in the clips there, but I did have to kind of pry the metal piece off. But in the manual here, it showed up to 12 millimeters. So I'm not quite sure how thick you can go, but you saw that I went a lot thicker than 12 millimeters. The interface here was really easy to use. I bet you within an hour, if you buy this machine, you'll be able to cut like a pro. You can also watch a lot of other videos on YouTube because a lot of other YouTubers have reviewed this same machine and they all give their own perspective, which is really handy for the beginner or the newbie wanting to get into this. The advantages of using plasma over a torch, I find, is that the plasma is safer. You don't have gases to use, you don't have oxygen, you don't have acetylene. However, you do need power to use the plasma, whereas the torches you don't. So there's pros and cons for both ways of cutting steel.